Muffin Man.
The Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man.
Yes, I know the Muffin Man.
Within the context of the film, this seemingly innocuous line from a popular nursery rhyme is imbued with Marxist allegory. The gingerbread man, who is mass-produced from a cookie cutter, symbolizes how the ruling class views the working class as mere commodities. His body parts being broken off during Farquaad's interrogation can be interpreted as the brutal extraction of labor value by the ruling class, which leaves the working class fragmented in the process. At the end of the film, after Lord Farquaad has been overthrown, the gingerbread man is given a crutch, a symbol of solidarity and support from the working class. Yet he still has one broken leg as he bears the scar of exploitation. Shrek is one of the most well-known franchises in Western popular culture, yet its political implications are critically underanalyzed. Pop culture's dismissal of the film as a mere children's comedy at its shallowest and a postmodernist fairy tale parody at its most profound immunizes the film from scholarly scrutiny and increases the susceptibility of the public to internalizing the Marxist ideologies simmering beneath Shrek's benign surface. In this video, I seek to dissect the allegorical meaning of Shrek from a Marxist lens. Firstly, I'll give a brief introduction to Marxism. Marxism is a school of political thought pioneered by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels that theorizes about class struggle between the ruling class and the working class under capitalism. The bourgeoisie is the ruling class in capitalist society who own the means of production and exploit the working class, or the proletariat, by using their labor power to accumulate capital. Marxists argue that capitalism alienates workers from their own labor, so they think that the proletariat should revolt to overthrow the bourgeoisie to establish a communist state. When applied to Shrek, this Marxist framework naturally invites an examination of how Marxist class distinctions align with character archetypes within the film. For instance, previous Marxist scholars have asserted that Lord Farquaad and Princess Fiona represent the bourgeoisie because they're aristocratic rulers who own means of production, whereas the villagers and fairy tale creatures represent the oppressed proletariat. Although these class distinctions are drawn correctly, this is an oversimplification of the power structure of the fairy tale kingdom, because these scholars fail to identify the racialized nature of the alterity of the fairy tale creatures within the proletariat class. Unlike Zootopia, where all the characters are animals, the Shrekian cinematic universe portrays a world where non-human characters coexist with humans. The former is therefore not only oppressed but dehumanized, and their oppression is inevitably racialized. As you can see from the arrows of oppression here, whereas the oppression of the villagers is merely class-based, the fairy tale creatures are criminalized and evicted for their very existence. Before analyzing the political economy of the fairy tale kingdom, I'll first categorize the main characters of the film according to Marxist typology, starting with Shrek. Like the proletariat, Shrek is marginalized. He lives in isolation and is discriminated against by both Lord Farquaad and Princess Fiona. For this reason, he's often interpreted as being representative of the proletariat. However, this interpretation neglects Shrek's territoriality about his swamp. Whereas the villagers who get chased out of his swamp represent the true proletariat, who sell their labor power to survive, and do not own significant means of production themselves, Shrek's ownership of the swamp, which is a large private property and potential means of production, complicates his proletarian status. He does not contribute labor to his society, nor does he need to do so to survive. Shrek even seems at first to be empowered by his marginalization. One of the first images we see of Shrek is him painting a sign that reads "Beware Ogre" on top of a menacing self-portrait, which he puts outside of a swamp to discourage people from trespassing. The shot immediately cuts to a government-issued poster that reads "Wanted Ogres," which highlights that the government alienates ogres as a class, whereas Shrek happily identifies himself as an instance of that class. Shrek's suppression is racialized rather than class-based. He's discriminated against by the humans because of his ogre race.
Look, I'm not the one with the problem, okay? It's the world that seems to have a problem with me. People take one look at me and go, "Ah, help, run! A big, stupid, ugly ogre." They judge me before they even know me. That's why I'm better off alone.
Since ostracization is all that Shrek has ever known, he cannot help but be complicit in his marginalization. Despite his vulgar exterior, Shrek's private behavior displays an educated refinement that reflects an internal alignment with bourgeois habitus. We see him eat a candlelight dinner with a fork and a knife. Though he eats food that humans would consider foul, his table manners are elegant. Shrek is also educated about the fairy tales that comprise the hegemonic culture in his society.
The princess will be up the stairs in the highest room in the tallest tower.
What makes you think she'll be there?
I read it in a book once.
And although it's easy to view Shrek as the leader of the revolution that overthrew Farquaad, Shrek's confrontation with Farquaad was motivated by a desire to protect his private property,
To get my swamp back!
and later to marry Fiona, rather than a desire to redistribute wealth.
What we gonna do when we get our swamp anyway?
Our swamp?
You know, when we through rescuing the princess and all that stuff.
We? Donkey, there's no we. There's no our. There's just me and my swamp. And the first thing I'm gonna do is build a 10-foot wall around my land.
Shrek's rejection of Donkey's use of inclusive language we underscores the tension between Shrek's individualistic values and Donkey's communal ones. Although Shrek isn't strictly a proletariat, as the story progresses, Shrek's growing relationship with Donkey might symbolize the proletarian potential for class solidarity. As Shrek's foil, Donkey lacks individuality, yet he possesses the collaborative instincts that makes him a natural proletarian comrade. Lacking economic and cultural capital, Donkey survives by building social capital. He's quick to flatter the ones who are stronger than him, such as Shrek.
That would be my home.
Oh, and it is lovely, just beautiful. You know, you are quite a decorator. It's amazing what you've done with such a...
And Dragon.
You're just reeking of feminine beauty.
Donkey's alienation makes him recognize the importance of class solidarity.
Man, you don't know what it's like to be considered a freak. Well, maybe you do, but that's why we gotta stick together.
While Shrek centers his individual interests, such as keeping a swamp and marrying Fiona, Donkey is motivated by collective interests, such as helping his friend. When Shrek sat with Donkey and named all the stars for him, Donkey asked,
That one there?
That's the moon.
Oh, okay.
In Donkey's inability to distinguish the moon from the stars, it's apparent that Donkey struggles to intuitively recognize a sovereign individuality, a star that is bigger and distinguished from all of the other stars. On one hand, this quality means that Donkey is naturally immune to social hierarchy. It explains why he sees Shrek as an individual rather than just a big, stupid, ugly ogre. On the other hand, this quality indicates that, unlike Shrek, who's aware of the class order, Donkey lacks the class consciousness that a communist revolution would require of the proletariat. However, Donkey develops his revolutionary potential as the film progresses, which results in him finally being able to stand up to Shrek in the third act.
That's your half and this is my half.
Oh, your half.
Yes, my half. I helped rescue the princess. I did half the work. I get half the booty.
In demanding his entitlement to a fair share of the rewards, Donkey asserts the Marxist idea that the distribution of goods should be based on the distribution of labor.
This is my swamp.
Our swamp.
Donkey correcting Shrek's use of my displaces proletarian consciousness, because in doing so he challenges Shrek's perceived right to own private property. All the main characters in the film are dynamic and experience character growth, except for Lord Farquaad, and that's because he's just a symbol for a larger political ideology. It's easy to dismiss him as an old money aristocrat who happens to be genocidal, but although his political power comes from feudalism, he tries to tear away from medieval traditions to establish a post-industrial capitalist society. He represents the human will to revolt against deterministic theology, the will that is simultaneously the source of innovation and inequality. So to talk about Lord Farquaad, we must first examine the political economy of Shrek. I categorize the setting of Shrek as a mix of European feudalism and post-colonial capitalism. The dichotomous settings of Duloc and the fairy tale forest correspond with capitalism and feudalism respectively. This political contrast mirrors the temporal contrast between modern and medieval times. Although the sterile and homogeneous Duloc exists in direct aesthetic contrast with the natural and diverse fairy tale forest, there could be an argument that this contrast itself comprises the capitalist system as visualized by Adorno and Horkheimer. Duloc being a grimy, spiritless city, its tower being typical of decorative industrial management buildings, the forest being reminiscent of the older houses just outside of the concrete city centers that look like slums. Duloc and the fairy tale land are dichotomous sources of power. Both feature an imposing phallic architecture, the Duloc Tower and the Dragon's Keep respectively, as the geographical center of their power. The Dragon's Keep enforces the deterministic power of fairy tale tradition through aesthetic elements such as the moat filled with lava and the trapped princess guarded by a fire-breathing dragon, and the rickety bridge with one unreliable plank. Though a spatially and temporally solitary fragment of the world, it governs fairy tale tradition and controls the destinies of the characters by using fairy tale tropes to establish the status quo. There's a princess that must be saved, a dragon that must be slayed. Interestingly, unlike in Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, magic is not a power wielded by individuals in the story. It's purely a deterministic force, which in a meta-sense manifests in plot devices such as Fiona's curse.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, is this not the most perfect kingdom of them all?
Well, technically you're not a king.
Thelonious, you were saying?
What I mean is, you're not a king yet. But you can become one. All you have to do is marry a princess.
Frustrated by the requirement to slay a dragon and marry a princess to legitimize his claim to the throne,
That champion shall have the honor, no, the privilege to go forth and rescue the lovely Princess Fiona from the fiery keep of the dragon.
Farquaad sees fairy tale traditions as bureaucratic obstacles to his quest for power. Disgusted by the mythological,
You and the rest of that fairy tale trash poisoning my perfect world.
he banishes fairy tale creatures from Duloc in an attempt to create a secular world. Duloc, a parody of Disneyland, is a post-industrial consumerist dystopia. Recognizing fairy tale as a metaphysical force that writes the fates of the characters in the story allows us to expand upon the implications of the fairy tale land Duloc dichotomy. While the former is governed by magical determinism that characterizes traditional fairy tales, the latter is ruled by a secular human will. By reducing individuals to mere economic agents, Farquaad establishes his self-determinism against the fate designated by fairy tales. His capitalist model empowers him at the cost of his citizens. Mirroring the irrational magical bureaucracy of fairy tales is the image of capitalist bureaucracy portrayed by a series of ropes for crowd control in the eerily empty Duloc town. Though seemingly useless, this capitalist bureaucracy is rational in that it serves the organization principles of capital, streamlined efficiency, and order. Farquaad rejects the theology of fairy tale by making himself the subject of a new religion, a cult of personality similar to those of Stalin and Mao. By designating himself the Dulocian mascot and selling figurines of himself as souvenirs, Farquaad commodifies his image to establish a monopoly over the cultural industry. In Duloc, capitalism and authoritarianism not only coexist but perpetuate each other. Farquaad's self-commodification helps him manipulate mass consciousness and legitimize his rule. His head is so big in comparison to his body that the caricatured bobbleheads of him sold as souvenirs look identical in proportion to him, which is an ironic touch. Under his dehumanizing rule, Dulocians are reduced to tools of propaganda, not too different from the puppets singing the Welcome to Duloc song in the information booth. Individuality is inherently threatening to cultural hegemony, which includes both the fairy tale one and the Farquaadian one. Whereas Fiona initially values adhering to a magical destiny,
It's destiny. Oh, you must know how it goes.
A princess locked in a tower and beset by a dragon is rescued by a brave knight. And then they share true love's first kiss.
Shrek asserts that,
The stars don't tell the future, Donkey. They tell stories.
contesting the epistemological authority of divine tradition. When naming stars for Donkey, Shrek sarcastically rewrites canonical folklore.
Look, there's Bloodnut, the flatulent. You can guess what he's famous for.
All right, now I know you're making this up.
No, look. There he is, and there's the group of hunters running away from his stench.
Shrek, like Farquaad, resists the cultural hegemony of mythology. Shrek isolates himself in a swamp to protect his freedom. However, as Marx asserted, only in community with others has each individual the means of cultivating his gifts in all directions. Only in the community, therefore, is personal freedom possible. Donkey represents the community in which Shrek's individuality becomes realized.
Take a look at me! What am I?
Really tall?
No! I'm an ogre! You know, grab your torch and pitchforks. Doesn't that bother you?
Nope.
Shrek has always been reduced to a member of his species, but Donkey recognizes not only his individuality, but his personality.
Well, you know what I like about you, Shrek? You got that kind of, I don't care what nobody thinks of me thing. I like that. I respect that, Shrek. You all right.
Individuality emerges through collective action. It's only by engaging with and confronting the social order that Shrek could realize his self-identity. Only when Fiona identified Shrek's unknightly behavior by asking,
What kind of knight are you?
did Shrek take pride in his exceptionality.
One of a kind.
Many parallels can be drawn between Shrek and Farquaad. While both embody bodily abnormality, Shrek is ostracized partially for having an excess of what Farquaad acutely lacks, physical dominance. Their respective sources of social discrimination informs their character motivations. Seen through the psychoanalytic lens, While Shrek and Farquaad both assert control over their territories, Shrek retreats into a natural concave hole, which is vaginal imagery, for shelter, whereas Farquaad builds an artificial tower, which is phallic imagery, to assert power. The huge and towering Shrek is concerned with self-protection through self-isolation, or through minimizing his presence, whereas Farquaad, who is of diminutive stature, is concerned with self-assertion and self-aggrandization. When Shrek sees the abruptly imposing Duloc Tower,
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
That's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
Shrek connected the objectified cultural capital of the kingdom to the embodied cultural capital of masculinity. What Farquaad lacks in height, which is a form of embodied cultural capital, he compensates for by pursuing institutionalized cultural capital, kingship. He plots to ascend the throne by marrying a princess who he picks from a Magic Mirror iPad in online shopping fashion in a parody of dating shows. The arbitrariness with which Farquaad chooses his future spouse illustrates the bourgeoisie function of marriage as solely a tool for social mobility and economic security.
I will make this Princess Fiona my queen, and Duloc will finally have the perfect king!
The profit incentive of marriage flattens the individuality of the princess. Fiona's fantasized view of her marriage is more romantic than Farquaad's profit-centric perspective at first glance, but upon further analysis, it turns out to be just as mechanical as his. She repeatedly reminds Shrek of the correct way to rescue a princess.
You know, you should sweep me off my feet out yonder window and down a rope onto your valiant steed. You're meant to charge in, sword drawn, banner flying. That's what all the other knights did.
Yeah, right before they burst into flame.
And expresses disappointment upon the discovery that her rescuer is an ogre.
This is all wrong. You're not supposed to be an ogre.
In requesting Shrek to conform to her Eurocentric and aristocratic standards of chivalry, Fiona embodies a colonial force as she enforces her culture upon him. Neither Farquaad nor Fiona are concerned with the individual. They exist only as members of their class. That is until Shrek intrudes upon the upper-class social order and brings about Fiona's disillusionment with a hierarchy that benefits her. Fiona's arc following her rescue is a postmodernist subversion of patriarchal feminine ideals. Just as the emancipation of women is both integral to and parallel with the emancipation of the working class, Fiona's gradual acceptance of her ogre form parallels her growing disillusionment and eventual rejection of the aristocratic hierarchy. Whereas Fiona subverts the patriarchal standards of femininity by physically defeating the merry men, Dragon, who Donkey first mistakes for a male dragon because of her size, power, and aggression, is also a subversive girl boss.
You're a girl dragon. Oh, sure. I mean, of course you're a girl dragon, 'cause you're just reeking of feminine beauty.
Whereas Fiona possesses the feminine powers of diplomacy and persuasion,
I need to find somewhere to camp now!
the dragon is voiceless, and her power is purely physical. Together, the two powerful female characters challenge the dimensions of femininity. However, a Marxist reading complicates this postmodernist examination of the film. Shrek was not the original revolutionary, nor did he change the class order. The original status quo of the kingdom is not Farquaad's capitalist dictatorship, but the superstructure of the fairy tale that overrules all of its inhabitants. Farquaad's rebellion against the magical status quo is the original act of resistance. Had he simply slayed the dragon instead of forcefully creating secular modernity by evicting fairy tale creatures, Shrek would have stayed in his swamp, and Farquaad would have been able to marry Fiona to ascend the throne. With the overthrowing of Lord Farquaad, the original status quo was restored. Though the two marriages in the wake of the revolution, of Shrek and Fiona as well as Donkey and Dragon, seem to celebrate the transcendence of boundaries between species and class, these marriages still perpetuate a heteronormative reproductive future, as the two protagonists become vehicles of social reproduction. The revolution merely reintegrated the previously solitary protagonists with society, realigned them with heteronormative temporality, and flattened them into means of production by transforming them into means of reproduction. The overthrowing of Farquaad did not eliminate class contradictions or resolve the fundamental injustices of capitalist society. Rather, it stabilized the economic system. In this way, it bears a closer resemblance to Marx's view of the bourgeois revolution rather than the proletariat revolution.
Do you know the Muffin Man?
Perhaps Perhaps the Muffin Man is the burgeoning revolutionary potential of the proletariat class. Perhaps he is the revolution itself in its full illusory glory. Perhaps he's the post-revolution despair at having replaced one exploitative system with another. Or perhaps he simply is the friends we made along the way.